What is up, Bills Mafia? Matt Parrino here. Ryan Talbot will be here in a quick minute. We got some people in the house tonight, came out to watch a live episode of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. Tonight brought to you by Wingnutz, and we are live in person. We love to be. Ed and Alicia, the OGs, the creators of these beautiful, beautiful chicken wings. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's been a heck of a ride, and I'd like to share with you some of the origin of what happened when we started to develop the wing. Once we started, we had a little tabletop deep fryer, and we threw 2 wings at a time into it, and we'd take a bite, and it was horrible. And so we would throw them away, and then we'd throw in 2 more, and we would take a bite, and it was terrible. And we kept on doing this over and over for a year.
Oh.
And finally, we hit the texture we were looking for. And in the meantime, all that time we were developing the sauces. It took me 10 months to develop the Wingnutz Hot and make it what you chase today.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia did the Wingnutz Medium in 1 try.
Wow.
And 18 years later, it is exactly the same.
Everything that we do in my house, it's better when my wife does it. So I'm not surprised in the slightest there, Ed. Alicia, what are the 3 top Wingnutz sauces?
The Wingnutz Mild surpasses everything. I mean, that is our #1 seller, hands down, global. The next one I would have to say is the honey garlic. We had it as a little temporary here and there, and people demanded, bring it back, make it permanent. So we did. And the third is kind of a toss-up between sometimes the Wingnutz Medium and sometimes the Cajun. And the Cajun is mostly because it's wet. It's not a dry rub.
Right. Awesome stuff. Well, thank you so much.
It is our pleasure.
For this amazing chicken wing that we all get to come together and celebrate. It's a great combination between chicken wings and obviously Buffalo Bills football, and we're going to talk a lot about it tonight. Thank you so much for starting us off here.
Every time you're here, we're happy to help.
Awesome. Ed and Alicia,
Matt. Thank you.
Right here at Wingnutz, we're going to bring in Ryan Talbot here. We're going to get into this podcast here because listen, I know it's May, but there's a lot to talk about with this football team because we have OTAs starting in a couple of weeks. And I tell people next week, I tell people all the time, they say, what do you do in the off season? I said, dude, my off seasons are busier sometimes than my regular season. Bills fans want to know about this team in April, in May, in June, and July to get ready for the season. And next week, it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I always say there is no off season in the NFL, Matt. You know, rookie mini camp. Now we have the OTAs coming up, training camp before we know it. There is always football to talk about when it comes to the Bills.
So here, I'm going to lay out the show for you a little bit. We're going to start with OTAs. We're going to preview this a little bit, what you can expect from the coverage the next couple of weeks, who we're really excited to watch out on the practice field, and we'll get into a couple of topics. Little Dirty, fan favorite, in the news the last couple of days, went on the Ty Dunn podcast. Definitely shout out for Ty Dunn over at golongtd.com. Does great stuff over there. He had Isaiah McKenzie on. They talked about a few things. We'll get into that as well. And then we're going to come up with power ranking the AFC East, the top 4 off seasons. Who had the best? Who had the worst? We'll get into it a little bit. Some of the key additions to teams across the AFC East. But let's start with who you're excited to watch over the next 3 weeks for OTAs.
You know, I'm going to go with, first of all, Greg Rousseau. I had Greg Rousseau in a recent podcast that I did with Joe Marino, and shout out to Joe Marino, Locked On Bills. For the most important players for 2023, I had Greg Rousseau as number 2, Matt. I look at Rousseau as a player where, besides quarterback, pass rush is the most important thing in my eyes. And Greg Rousseau went from 4 sacks as a rookie to 8 sacks in his second year. Pass rush win rate went through the roof in year 2. I'm expecting that big 3rd-year leap, and if he has that double-digit sack season, I think that this is the year that he emerges as that main pass rush weapon for Buffalo, despite having Von Miller in the fold.
I really like where you're going here, mainly because we're going to be talking about all these offseason moves for AFC East teams. I think Greg Rousseau, in a lot of ways, what they think of him, the Bills, is why they didn't go out and make a bigger splash at defensive end. And so I think with Von Miller potentially out for the first couple of games, depending on how long it takes for him to come back, and oh, by the way, I'm just noticing, man, are we color coordinated tonight, man? The mustard is jumping off the screen right now. I love it. Did this surprise you at all? Because I told you I was going to wear the red.
You did. You threw me off. We called earlier in the day. You said you were going to wear red. I said ketchup and mustard, and no, you showed up in the yellow.
I just didn't do all my laundry, and the red was still in the washing machine, so I apologize for that. But with Rousseau, I think over the next couple of months, this is an important time for him. I mean, year 2 to year 3, I feel like he could potentially take a huge step, and I think he has to now transition from being maybe Von Miller's sidekick or understudy, not even understudy, like the guy that is co-starring with him. He's got to kind of become the star. This is a first-round draft pick, and I think that over the next couple of weeks, it's going to be fun to watch and see what he can do.
Really excited about him. And a lot of fans forget that he opted out of his final season in college. So that year off, he still made some impact plays as a rookie in Buffalo. You saw even more last year. I'm expecting him to continue to grow into that body, learn how to use that as a weapon, use the wingspan. Everything is in his pass rush arsenal. Who are you looking forward to watching?
I was really bummed out at rookie minicamp 2 weeks ago that I didn't come away with more on Dorian Williams, the third-round linebacker, mainly because, and again, they weren't in pads. They're not going to be over the course of voluntary OTAs, which is important to note. Not everybody will probably be there on Tuesday. I know everybody's going to be kind of tracking, waiting for maybe a Stephon Diggs updates, but if he's not there, I wouldn't be surprised. These are voluntary in nature. But in Williams, and I sent some stuff along to you, and I want to talk about him a little bit and maybe how the Bills view him and this middle linebacker competition coming up. Brandon Beane was on a podcast with Cynthia Freeland from NFL.com over the last week, and he did a bit of a dive with her on each prospect. And when it came to Dorian Williams, he talked about one specific trait that I think is interesting: block destruction. This is a guy that he plays physical, he plays fast, but he's also able to identify, but then blow up protection plans, which I think, if we're being honest, was one of the knocks on maybe his predecessor in Tremaine Edmunds.
With Edmunds, shedding the blocks was one of the big things that people held against him. And, it's funny, Brandon Beane did a circuit, I think, of podcasts this offseason, and he did the Green Light podcast. And he talked about Edmunds specifically, and he said, Edmunds was great, huge guy, did a really good job here in Buffalo, but he also mentioned it was almost unfair to him to have to try to cover some of those running backs and tight ends out of the backfield, because despite his athleticism, this is a guy that's 6'5", he was always a little bit behind on some of those really athletic players. I think the Bills are really going to shift gears in terms of what they're looking for from that position, and a guy like Dorian Williams is intriguing because he has the athleticism to stay with those types of players.
Shout out to Arthur Moats, former Bills linebacker. He does a show on YouTube, and I was watching a clip from him on Dorian Williams, broke down some of his tape. And one of the things that he really emphasized in the clip that he showed, twofold. Number one, Dorian Williams is a really patient linebacker, which is a trait that, listen, when you're playing 1,000,000 miles per hour, having a little bit of patience while playing fast, it's super important when you're diagnosing things. And he showcased, now he played more off the ball, that like weak side linebacker in college. But I think if he can get up to speed, and you have a take on this as well, it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up being the middle linebacker for the Bills. And then Terrell Bernard, who I know who they're super high on as well, maybe he kind of falls into more of a Sam role and they play more 3 linebacker looks. Sean McDermott's probably going to blitz more this season. I think everybody's talking about that. They're expecting a little bit of a different look for this defense after, what in the playoffs the last couple of years have been disappointing finishes. Maybe some more 3 linebacker looks, Bernard, Milano, and Williams on the field at the same time could be a possibility.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that idea. Shout out to Arthur Moats. Don't cross the Moats. Great guy, great former Bills player. But yeah, when it comes to Dorian Williams, listen, I'm really intrigued by him, but I don't think the Bills are going to throw him out on the field week 1, for instance, and have him start, because when you're playing that position, it's your responsibility to relay the plays, make sure everyone's in position to do their jobs. I think it's going to be something where they hand the job off to him for week 4, week 5, when they feel like he really knows more of the ins and outs of the system. And different linebacker position. But even with Matt Milano as a rookie, Milano came in and he had to wait his time, bide his time a little bit behind a veteran. I think they feel confident in Tyrell Dodson in terms of calling the plays, being out there on the field, having a little bit of that athleticism. But eventually, I think this is going to be Dorian Williams' job to lose.
Inside Froth here, unbelievable selection of beers. I mean, if you go up and look at the chalkboard, I mean, 1 through 20 or 25, whatever the numbers are, there's a fun experience waiting for you right out here at Froth, Wingnutz North Buffalo. The wings are off the chain, Ryan. They offer a wing flight. Explain what this is.
Yeah, wing flight, just like a beer flight. You can get a little sampler of almost every wing that they have here. You can't go wrong with that because, if you've ever been to a restaurant, Matt, you want to try something new and maybe you don't end up liking it. But if you get that wing flight, if you don't like one wing, hey, big deal. You have every other kind of flavor to choose from. So love the wing flights here. You mentioned the beer selection. I'm all about that Juice Life. I believe that's number 9 on the chart. So highly recommended if you're here.
All right, let's transition here. Isaiah McKenzie in the news. Now Indianapolis Colts wide receiver. Spent the past 5 seasons with the Bills in various roles. The Bills wanted him to take over that slot spot last year. It didn't really work out. He was on for over an hour in what Ty Dunn calls these happy hour podcasts where fans get to ask questions. And one of the things that came up was talking about the playoff game last year and what happened. Because coming out of that game, if you remember back, Matt Milano talked a lot about not being enough energy, not being enough juice, and they just weren't up for the game. Well, Isaiah McKenzie talked about the weather and how much the snow impacted things. And some websites, some aggregators got a hold of it this week, and it went absolutely wildfire. Basically, Isaiah McKenzie said, and I'm paraphrasing, the game happens in a dome or in a situation similar to Cincinnati a few weeks earlier. It's probably a completely different game. Jamar Chase got a hold of it. He said that was his first game ever in the snow. It was the same for the Bengals. What's your takeaway from those comments from McKenzie and what it means maybe for this offense moving into a very important 2023 season?
Yeah, excuse you for the juvenile example, but, excuses are like butts. We all have one and they all stink, Matt. Isaiah McKenzie saying that the Bills struggled.
Get out.
Isaiah McKenzie saying that the Bills struggled because of the snow. That's just a cop-out. I do feel like, sure, there were certain routes maybe they couldn't run as efficiently, but on that day, the Bengals were simply the better team. And, you can point to a lot of factors for that. The Bills were probably emotionally drained going into that contest. And you don't want to make excuses for this team, but I don't think that playing in a dome, playing in warm weather, playing anywhere else would have necessarily changed that outcome. The Bengals were up and ready for that game. The Bills just did not show up.
I love Isaiah McKenzie. Every interaction that I had with this guy in the locker room over the last 5 years has been amazing. He was always willing to talk. I'm not trying to crap on him too hard here, for lack of a better term, but I think like in games like that, when you just need to make a play, I'd rather a player come out and just say, I need to make more plays in a game with the game on the line. And the fact that they took Stephon Diggs out of the game, he was obviously frustrated. And for a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, who, there were big hopes for him last year. Like, he said all the right things going into the season. He had this unbelievable training camp and preseason, and everybody was excited for what he potentially could bring to this offense. And it didn't really materialize. Now, he talked a little bit about how Ken Dorsey, the shift from Brian Dable to Ken Dorsey was hard on the offense because Dable really specialized in that short and intermediate area, getting the little guys, if you will, the midgets in the offense more involved in the passing game because of the lack of a run game at times. And so when you have Ken Dorsey, who's so willing to go downfield and attack with big shot plays, it didn't transition the same way and as cleanly as I think the Bills would have hoped. And I think they knew that, and that's why they tried a bunch of different things down the stretch last season.
Yeah, I think the Bills really did go into the season saying we're going to try to do things, replicate what they did when they had a lot of success with Cole Beasley. But I think early on they really realized that Isaiah McKenzie, there are moments, there are teams that he could really thrive against, man defense, for instance, using that speed, but it just wasn't the same. And when that happened, they started to use him more as a decoy and to start going deep with the ball. And the Bills did not have that consistent secondary weapon. And now, you hope Gabe Davis with no ankle injury this year can be that guy. But they go out and they draft Dalton Kincaid. I think that's going to really help them open up that middle of the field, being that quasi slot receiver for this team. Ken Dorsey, there were some really good things in his first year as an offense coordinator, but I really think he went back to the drawing board this offseason and said, I really do have to work on that short, intermediate pass game because you can't rely on 30, 40-yard balls down the field on a consistent basis.
I got a fun little side topic here that just popped into my mind. Who do you think, looking ahead to training camp and preseason, is going to be this year's version of Isaiah McKenzie? Somebody that comes into camp as maybe not somebody that everybody's talking about, but that starts to gain some speed, and then all of a sudden by the start of the season, we have completely different expectations for a player after that training camp preseason period.
I'm glad you used the word speed because Deontay Hardy is who comes to mind for me. Deontay Hardy was listed as this breakout candidate on a lot of national media websites last year, and he had a nagging foot injury that limited him in his time on the field. I like what he brings. He's faster than Isaiah McKenzie. He's a little bit better of a route runner. I think that he can come in year one in Buffalo and really reestablish, his value as a player. And you saw the contract that he was given by the Bills. The Bills have faith in him and being someone that can be a contributor instantly here in Buffalo.
So one thing that I was kind of spitballing recently is, what are the Bills, what have their moves this offseason indicated to us? Signing Latavius Murray and Damian Harris, right? Moving on from Devin Singletary, they go with two of more bigger physical backs, maybe wanted to establish the run a little bit more, maybe run in between the tackles a little bit more better, a little bit more consistently. Who is a player that's going to have to be on the field probably a lot of the time, blocking out of the slot or on the outside if they choose to use Stephon Diggs on the outside a little bit more? Trent Sherfield. And so for me, if he has a really good summer, I think Sherfield could be in line not only as like a blocking guy, like a Jake Kumaro type villain. I think he could be on the field and maybe even find a way to be this team's third wide receiver. I think Kincaid's going to have a big role. I think Dawson Knox is still going to be on the field a ton. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be like, they're really scrapping for trying to find opportunities. But I think Sherfield does a little bit more. I like Hardy's upside. They went out and they paid him for a reason. But if we're going for like a flyer, somebody that's not on the radar right now, I think Sherfield could be somebody that really generates buzz by the time the summer's over.
Sherfield's intriguing because when he was back in Arizona, there was this great story written on him where one of the positional coaches said, listen, you should be out there starting for this team based on your training camp, based on your summer. But we drafted someone, and I think it was in round 3, and we got to get those guys out there on the field. The one thing I'll say about Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, they're going to play the best guys. We saw it last year in terms of fits for the system, fits for this team when they started Benford in week 1, for instance, over a first-round pick in Elam, who, by the way, we both love Elam. We both love the flashes that we saw from him. They're not afraid to go with guys that maybe aren't paid the most or maybe are just kind of brought in here on a one-year trial basis, whatever it may be. Sherfield really had flashes last year in Miami, and he's had flashes in all of his stints with these teams. So in Buffalo, he's going to get a really fair shake. And if he plays the way he has in the past, maybe he will have that big role here in Buffalo.
Physical after the catch, which I think is the most important thing to think about when thinking about Sherfield. Okay, we're going to transition a little bit here to our last segment of the show here today. And we're going to talk a bit about the AFC East, because I think reshuffling the deck a little bit and seeing kind of where everybody stands. I was reading an article the other day from CBS Sports, and they ranked from 1 to 32 the off seasons for all 32 teams. No surprise, the Jets ranked at number 2. They gave them an A grade. The Bills and the Dolphins got a B, and the Bills got a C. Patriots got a C as well. They were ranked below them. Where do you want to start in terms of looking at the AFC East, how each team has changed the complexion of their franchise this offseason? Who do you think's done the best job?
It's easy to point to the Jets because of Aaron Rodgers and the hole that they had at quarterback. I'm going to go, though, with the Miami Dolphins because of 2 reasons. Jalen Ramsey and Vic Fangio. Okay. Vic Fangio has found success in this league wherever he's gone. And a guy like Fangio, I think, can rejuvenate a Jalen Ramsey, who I thought had a down year last year. He was beaten on a lot of plays. You look at that week 1 game against Buffalo, Stephon Diggs kind of had his way in that matchup. And there were other games, too, where Ramsey just didn't look the same. I think that, 1, Fangio can get the best out of him. And 2, in Miami, Xavier Howard opposite him. I mean, that's just a lethal 1-2 punch. So for me, those two moves, based on what we've seen from the offense of Miami when Tua is healthy, that's a scary combination.
I'm glad that you started there, because if I'm ranking my first inclination is to say that the Dolphins ranked third. If I'm ranking who had the best offseason, I'm going to get into it in a second, why I think that they're so far down. But I don't think we should understate the importance of Fangio to that defense, because of course, like, adding in Jalen Ramsey gets all the headlines, but they went out and they traded for Bradley Chubb last year. They got to figure out a way to unlock that defensive line. Emmanuel Ogbah's coming back off of injury. They have Christian Wilkins. They have some nice pieces on the interior. Vic Fangio finds a way to generate pass rush. They go out and they sign David Long, who I think was probably one of the top defensive prizes. You know, a lot of people talked about Tremaine Edmonds. I think Long is right in that conversation as well. So they have some really good pieces at all three levels of their defense. I think their defense is going to be really good. But why I rank them number 3 behind the Jets and the Bills, and we'll get to who I have first in a second, offensive line. And it's the same issue that I have with the Jets. They didn't do enough to build around their quarterback. What happened for the Miami Dolphins last year, the last couple of years? Tua Tagovailoa gets hurt, and he leaves the game, and he doesn't come back for multiple weeks. And I think you had to find a way to prioritize the offensive line. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs. I know we always use them as the example. They're in the Super Bowl. They're in the AFC title game. Things don't go well on the offensive line. Patrick Mahomes is getting beat up. He's getting hurt. They go out and they trade for Orlando Brown. They go out and they draft 2 Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, back-to-back in that one draft. They found answers on their offensive line, and I think if you look at the Miami Dolphins, they just haven't done enough to add quality, reliable players. I think Tua is going to be under siege again this year. And he's playing in a division where it just so happens that all 4 of these teams have really good defensive lines.
Yeah, no, that's a great talking point. And, you know, you look at a team even like the Bengals now. The Bengals are doing the same thing. Joe Burrow has been under attack at times. They've been attacking the offensive line. If you really want to make it to the Super Bowl, be a contender, offensive line is important. So that's a valid argument against the Dolphins, is a valid argument against the Jets, who, you know, when the Jets traded for Aaron Rodgers, they swapped those first-round picks, and that really took them out of the offensive line conversation because all those top guys were gone by that point, whereas Buffalo, which we can get into a little bit here, they really did attack the interior of their offensive line, at least this offseason. Really excited about O'Cyrus Torrence.
Yeah, and I think the offensive line, to me, was one of the things that the Bills had to get serious about fixing this offseason. And so Brandon Beane went into his top left drawer. He pulled out all the darts, and he threw them all. And he got a couple interior pieces. And I know, you know, people have talked a lot about Spencer Brown being the only option at right tackle, right? That's true. Like, there aren't a lot of other competitive pieces for him. But if Torrance is really good, if McGovern is really good, and then maybe David Edwards gets into the conversation, maybe they throw Ryan Bates out there. If people remember, a couple of years ago, he was really good at right tackle. And I know that Brandon Beane kind of pushed that to the side when we brought that up. The point being, they have a lot of different options. They have some players that can play multiple spots. And oh, by the way, Nick Broker, I know that, you know, he's going to play some interior offensive line for them. Played left tackle in college. I think he can play some tackle in a pinch as well.
Yeah, they definitely have a lot of options. And I really think the Bills, after free agency, were feeling pretty good about the interior of their line when they bring in McGovern, when they bring in David Edwards. And when they got to round 2 of the draft and they saw Torrance just sitting there, it was just hey, we can't go away from this guy. Top 30 visitor, was projected as a first-round pick. We would rather have more bodies than not enough, like Butker coming back as well. So they really are attacking the interior of this line. But Torrance, to me, really stands out the most, Matt, because the Bills have had this prototypical type of offensive lineman, especially at guard, smaller, more athletic. O'Cyrus Torrence is not smaller. This is a big, massive man who can just maul people. So I really think that when it comes to the Bills, yeah, he's going to be possibly a day one starter, but he's going to help the Bills in crunch time, in those late games where they want to run out the clock, and they can lean on those Damian Harrises and Latavius Murrays. And, hey, O'Cyrus, you're going to pave the way for these guys late and seal the games for us.
There could potentially be 4 new starters on the offense this season. If you think about the 2 guard spots, running back, depending on what happened. I mean, if James Cook's a starter, he would technically be a new starting player for them. And then maybe tight end. I mean, Dalton Kincaid could end up being their starter. I know it's not going to be something that would be a departure from previous Sean McDermott-led teams and trusting things over to a rookie, and we could talk about that in a moment. But I think that what the Bills did this offseason, they prioritized offense. They brought in a bunch of new faces at multiple positions to give, even at wide receiver, where you're looking at Diggs and Davis at the top of the depth chart again, Hardy, Sherfield, Justin Shorter. There's a lot of players that are going to be in the mix that weren't on this roster a year ago.
No, absolutely. And I feel like Sean McDermott went back to the drawing board at the end of this offseason and said, listen, we have a lot of talent. We're built for the regular season, but come playoff time, we're just not able to hold up against some of these other teams. And we need to go out and we need to address that. And they do it with the offensive line. And they add a weapon in Kincaid in round one. The defense, they're able to bring back Jordan Poyer. The only starter they'll be missing on that side of the ball is obviously going to be Edmonds. And it sounds like from Bean's comments, he was almost willing to move away from that, change things up, be more aggressive. So I like what the Bills did. I like that they pretty much said we can get to a certain point with the way our roster is constructed, but we need to be able to take that next step, get to the Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl. And right now what we're doing is not working.
Listen, I know this is a Bills podcast, and I know that there's a lot of Bills fans in this bar right now, but listen, I think the Jets had the best offseason of the AFC East. From the perspective of they went out and they addressed their number one hole, and even average level Aaron Rodgers that we saw in 2022 is worlds better than anything they saw at quarterback last year. I know our former producer, and we're going to bring on our current producer here in a moment, AJ Sobalski, big Mike White fan, right? Mike White stinks. And I've seen multiple times in articles talking about the Miami Dolphins offseason, Mike White being the first name that people talk about when they talk about what they've done to change their roster. Listen, Mike White he's a competitor, dude, right? Like he goes out there, he plays his heart out, but he's not very good, in my opinion. It's a good backup quarterback, solid backup quarterback. The Jets went out, of course, Aaron Rodgers. I like the Joe Tippmann draft pick. They go out and they sign McCole Hardman. They bring over Alan Lazard. They already have a bona fide number one in Garrett Wilson. They're going to get Breece Hall back. This offense is really good. Now, what made it close between the Bills and the Jets for me was the lack of attention to the offensive line. Now, if Tippmann comes in and becomes like a starter, and I think he's probably going to be, the other Connor McGovern is the only real competition at that spot. Mekhi Becton is back in the mix potentially. He hasn't really panned out for them, but this is his last chance to make a name for himself. There's some potential interesting options, but there's still questions. And so with those questions, I have some concerns, but I really like Chuck Clark on the defensive side of the ball. You talk about a really elite secondary already with led by Sauce Gardner. You add a veteran guy like that to the mix back there with their defensive line, that defense is going to be really good once again.
Yeah, and I'll add another name to the mix, in Nathaniel Hackett. And I know, wasn't ready for the bright lights of being a head coach in this league with Denver. It was a disaster. But he has coached Aaron Rodgers. He's going to be able to come in and play to Rodgers' strengths. And, you mentioned the offensive line with the Jets. It's a question mark. Rodgers is not as athletic as he was before, but he's going to be able to get the ball out of Rodgers' hands quickly. You mentioned Lazard being there. They brought in Randall Cobb. They brought in a lot of the former teammates for him to kind of work with early on here. So we've talked about this. Miami, the Jets, they were shopping at Wegmans and Tops. The Bills were at Aldi, and there's nothing wrong with that. The Bills, though, financially, they could not go out and make those big splash moves. They couldn't bring in a Von Miller. They couldn't bring in those big names.
When we go to training camp, and the first time we go up to interview Poona Ford, I'm going to tell him that you called him Aldi.
I love Poona Ford. I was excited about that move. But, hey, listen, they got him, though, on a great deal after the draft. So it worked out for this team. But they couldn't make those big splashes like they've done in the past. And I thought the Bills, though, have done a really nice job in terms of the financial restrictions that they had in terms of the moves that they made.
One thing on the Patriots that I want to bring up before we move on, I want to bring on Anthony here to talk a little bit about the Jets and some other things. I've kind of crapped on the Patriots a little bit over the last couple of months. We were talking about this, Anthony and I, before the show. They had a really good draft. Like they got some potential starters. They got some guys that are going to compete for some jobs. And I think defensively at all three levels, they are better going into next season. They were already really good. They're always going to be really good with Bill Belichick on defense. Matthew Judon has been an absolute beast for them the last couple of years. I just feel like they haven't had a lot of help for him. if Mac Jones and Bill O'Brien hit things off somehow, and he can find a way to just be average, I think the Patriots have a path to being a pest in this division.
Yeah, being hovering around that 500 or slightly thereafter. But we've talked about this. These divisional matchups, whether you're talking AFC East teams, AFC West teams, they know each other so well that there's always those teams that are pests to others. Absolutely, the Patriots can be that. I love the first-round pick of Gonzalez in New England. I like a lot of the talent they have there. And listen, they haven't drafted well in the past. Their entire 2019 draft is now gone, out the door. But with this year's draft, they found some value. They found some players. And if Mac Jones can revert even to like rookie year form, sure, they can kind of hang around and be a thorn in the side in the AFC East.
I also don't think that that's possible. I think what you saw of Mac Jones early was just like first run through the schedule. Defensive coordinators didn't have tape on him yet. I think he gets really flustered really quick. And maybe Bill O'Brien can silence some of that in his head, the noise, and he can find a way to just be on, operate a little bit more consistently on schedule. But I'm not holding my breath for that. All right, let's bring on Anthony here. Hey, everybody listening in the house, let's give it up for Anthony DeChico. Yeah, come on in here, buddy. So Anthony, he's just wrapping up his internship with us. He's been the producer of the Shout podcast now for 4 months. You're definitely in the top 3 of producers of the show. Guess how many we've had? 3. We've had 3. No, you've been awesome, man. Thank you so much for all of your help. Now, you're a big Jets fan.
I am.
That's okay. Like, people got real emotional about that last episode when you kind of popped on.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at this season, I think this is a fun exercise. What has to happen for things to go wrong for the Jets? Because right now, if you look at the national narrative, the Jets are the it team, right? Like, they're going to the Super Bowl. If you look at this thing over the next 4 or 5 months, what goes wrong for that not to happen?
Well, obviously injuries. I think between AVT, Breece Hall, Aaron Rodgers, they're guys that just scare you. I think there are a lot of guys that can get hurt on this roster. I also think the whole Nathaniel Hackett thing, obviously it did work out kind of when he was Aaron Rodgers' offensive coordinator, but it was kind of scary hours at Russ in Denver. Russ was not cooking. He was not dangerous in Denver. So it's that's really scary. But I mean, I like where the team's headed. I think another thing that could be scary is Robert Saleh in big games, kind of close games as a head coach. I don't think he really set himself apart as a head coach, especially in this losing streak. There were a lot of decisions, whether it be against Detroit, against a bunch of teams, kind of even that Minnesota game, the games they could have won to kind of put them in the playoffs, that they just, they weren't winning those games. And I think a lot of those kind of fell on Saleh. And I think kind of the defense was great and the offense kind of looked pretty bad. So, I mean, coaching-wise, Saleh's going to have to step up this year big time if they want a chance.
I love that point, Ryan, because one of the things that Sean McDermott has been so criticized for over the years, and they've had a lot of success. I mean, 5 playoff appearances in 6 seasons. I mean, they've gone to an AFC title game. There's been a lot of winning happening in Buffalo, right? But when things have gone off the rails a little bit, game management, decisions on 4th down, decisions on 3rd down, even last season, that 3rd and 2, 40-yard pass. I know it was a Ken Dorsey call, but it's one that I think definitely gets talked about a lot. For Robert Saleh, now this is the pressure cooker, right? Yeah. Every time he turns on that TV in the office, he's going to see Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman, whoever's on the screen talking about the New York Jets. And now he's going to have to go out on Sundays and Mondays, mostly in prime time, and deliver. It's going to be tough.
It's going to be scary. I think the offseason was really good, though. I mean, we got to be honest. Besides Rodgers, I mean, the offensive weapons they added around him are legit. Was offensive line addressed enough? Probably not. But I think Tippmann, I think Tippmann, I think Billy Turner, and I think even, Carter Warren, who they drafted out of Pittsburgh, could be enough juice to get you through, if AVT and obviously Becton stay healthy.
Yeah, listen, it's a big year for Robert Saleh. It's a big year for Joe Douglas. If this does not turn into a deep playoff run, in my opinion, there could be jobs that are lost this year because you don't bring in Aaron Rodgers to go with 9 wins, 10 wins, sneak into the playoffs. You have Super Bowl aspirations, and anything short of that, you might have guys, like I said, out of a job because Joe Douglas, as much as he hit on last year's draft, there's a few of his other draft classes that really have not panned out for him. So this is a huge year all around for that front office and the coaching staff.
as a Jets fan, now looking at the new way that this division looks, who scares you more, the Bills or the Dolphins? And you don't have to answer just because it's a Bills podcast. If you're looking at the division, what's the pecking order now? Has it changed at all? Is it still the Bills at the top? And which team do you think is more live at this point with the Jets?
So obviously the team that's most live, I mean, the Patriots always beat them, but the Patriots got better. I think even this draft class, I think, those 2 first-round picks are legit, and I think Belichick's a defensive coach. I think those guys are going to do really well for them. They added Schuster, Gesicki. Did they do incredibly, free agent-wise? No, but they got better. I think right now Miami still is the scariest team. I just with that offense, especially the way they looked early in the season, guys, when it was Tua and Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I mean, that was pretty scary. So obviously the Jets have the D-backs to kind of run with them, but that's the scariest team for me because the Bills beat the Jets, but the Jets beat the Bills. So it went back and forth. I mean, that first game was really encouraging in MetLife. Obviously the Mike White game, we can't, hold that against the Jets, I don't think. And I got a little bone to pick with Mike White. I think Mike White's a little better than you think, Matt.
Oh my gosh. Dude, Anthony and AJ are besties for life. Dude, every time we would do a podcast, I would talk negatively about Mike White, and AJ would have a conniption.
Can I explain quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So think about the offense he's going into. He's going into the McDaniel offense, and think about his progression this season. When that first Cincinnati game they played when they won, it was, what was it? Trick play. It was 2 years ago. Remember, it was trick plays. It was dink and dunks. It was check downs. This season, he was throwing the ball down the field. They were explosive plays. He was not afraid. You know what I mean? Obviously, I know the toughness thing is the thing you think is the only real skill is. But, I mean, he was really not afraid to push the ball down the field. And I think it's a good insurance policy for Tua.
Oh, it is, for sure.
You have a quarterback like Tua who's getting hurt, all the time. You have no idea what his future is. I think you have a guy like Mike White who could make enough big plays down the field for you and at least keep you in ball games. He's better than, I think, Teddy Bridgewater as a backup. I think he's better than a game manager. I think he can put you in a position to possibly win football games. If Mike White was the quarterback in that wild card game against Buffalo, I think Miami's winning that game.
Okay, that's maybe it was close. Maybe.
I mean, Skylar Thompson.
But here's the thing. They beat him up pretty good, and he didn't make it. Skylar Thompson got hit in that game, too, and he found a way to finish. Here's the thing with Mike White, Ryan, and you can kind of take it from here on Mike White. My biggest – so you've been a Jets fan for how long? Your whole life? How many years?
22, so yeah.
Right. So before I started on this job, and we're not going to get into the Bills fan talk here, okay? People watching at home, I've took a lot of heat for this the last couple of days. People just want to live in a world where I lie to them and just tell them, I root for the Bills. Doesn't matter. I root for them. So I see myself in you because I spent years watching the E.J. Manuels of the world, the Kyle Ortons of the world, and finding a way to lie to myself and say, there's a world that we can live in where they can be a good quarterback. But the truth of the matter is, listen, Mike White can make big plays at times, but he can also make some really bad plays. I do agree with that take, though. I do think he's a significant upgrade over Teddy Bridgewater.
To me, he's almost like a little bit of a Ryan Fitzpatrick. You can trust him in a 1 year, 1 game, 2 game stint, but you don't want him out there long term.
Whoa. We are not going to put Ryan Fitzpatrick and Mike White in the same bucket. I'm sorry. I can't do that for you. Ryan Fitzpatrick was he was a good player for a lot of years. Mike White has had good games. I know he threw for 400 yards the one game, right? Yeah. Most of the rest of it has been
Fitzpatrick also lost the Jets that game against Buffalo. Remember that one, the Rex Ryan game?
Playoffs on the line.
Playoffs on the line.
He's not as much of a fan favorite as Fitzpatrick, but I'm just saying, there are games where he's going to surprise you, and he's going to go for 300 yards. He's going to have 3 TDs. But then there's going to be those games, too, where he just doesn't show up, and he struggles, and he turns the ball over, and it's where was this guy? What happened to the guy from last week? And there was a lot of that with Fitzpatrick throughout his career.
That's a good comp. All right. He's Ryan Talbot. He's Anthony DeChico. Let's give it up for Anthony, who's graduating tomorrow from the University of Buffalo. Congratulations, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a great semester. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. I'm Matt Parrino. This has been Shout Live from Wingnutz. We'll be here once a month with a live show. Best wings in town. Come on over to Froth. Get some delicious beers. And once a month, come up here, hang out with us, talk some Bills. It's a great time. We'll see you guys next week. OTAs. Have a great night. Take care, everybody.